Okay. And so, for those of you who are new or haven't been here a while, I titled this Sunday school lesson "Game of Thrones." It has nothing to do with the TV show. Absolutely nothing. I did a study of the Kings several years ago, and it prompted me to kind of come up with a Sunday school lesson that went through the history of Israel, at least ancient Israel. So what we did was I wanted to look at, or as I was doing all the study to get all this ready, I realized that we're actually seeing four perspectives in the history of Israel. We're seeing the priestly perspective, we're seeing the prophetic perspective, we're seeing the royal perspective, and we're seeing an eternal perspective. And I call those perspectives thrones. So throughout using all the prophets, using the books of the Kings, the books of the Chronicles, we started with Solomon. We figured Saul and David was that would be a whole different study. But we started with Solomon, and basically in the time frame we're in, we're trying to go as chronological as we can. Although when it comes to eternal, we're jumping. So the Northern Kingdom, 60 years prior to this, was decimated by the Assyrians. They were all taken into, I say exile. Basically what they were was the Assyrians had this knack for taking their conquered peoples and just distributing them everywhere. So there is a lost, I say lost, they're separated from each other. They're in an unfamiliar place, and there's no one familiar to them that they can associate with. And so they've kind of lost their identity. And then we just finished the part where the Babylonians, 60 years later now, have come in. They've decimated Jerusalem, which basically Jerusalem, when you decimate Jerusalem, Judah's gone. So Judah has been destroyed and taken into captivity, and they have all been moved to Babylon. Because that's how the Babylonians work. They didn't want to put any. They tried briefly to put a puppet king in place, but that didn't work because the puppet king tried to revolt there in Judah. So they took all of them, moved them to Babylon, so they could keep them under their thumb there in Babylon. Of course, the little bitty stories that we haven't got into is, by nature of 2,000, even 4,500 years later, 4,000 years later, somewhere in there. We know that Daniel and 3 of his friends were taken as children several years prior to Jerusalem falling. They were taken to Babylon and raised as Babylonian rulers, although what the Babylonians thought was, we're brainwashing them to become us, and God had other plans. He used these four, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to await the coming people so they could live together and be ruled by their own. And we'll get into that soon, that part of the story. But where we're at today, Jerusalem's been decimated. Most of the people went to Babylon. There were a few that were left. The Babylonians did not want those that they really had to take time to take care of. So they left the poor, they left the destitute, they left the widows, the orphans, they left all those around. They gave Jeremiah, who was the only quote unquote leader left, they gave him the option. Do you want to go with the people we're taking in exile, or do you want to stay? Well, he said, I want to stay with my people. So he stayed. And what we find out in just a few brief verses that we may have skipped over, I can't remember now. He eventually goes to, or the tradition is he goes to Egypt. And that may be where a lot of the people that were left end up going, because there's nothing left for them in Jerusalem or Judah. So they may have all headed off towards Egypt. And so we believe that this is written either during that journey or after they've arrived in Egypt. Okay? So we've gone through Lamentations 1 through 3. The book only has 5 chapters, and it's kind of a bell curve if you look at it. It starts off the lowest of the low, Jeremiah feeling sorry for himself, and then the second chapter he gets to the point where, yeah, well, we deserved it. God did this, we deserved it. And third chapter is the most hopeful of the three, although, as we saw last week, it wasn't all that cheery, but it at least offered hope. Well, now we're delving back into, yeah, we brought it on ourselves, and then next week we'll hit another low. So kind of like a bell curve. So we're on the downside of the hill. Things are going to not look very good. So in chapter 4, verses 1 through 2, someone want to read those, or 1 through 3? Ooh, I put the wrong title up there. It's verses 1 through 3. Anybody want to read that? Okay.
How the gold had lost its luster, the fine gold became dull. The sacred gems were scattered in every street corner. How the precious children of Zion, once worth their weight in gold, are now considered a pot of clay, the work of the potter's hand. Even jackals offer their breasts to nurse their young, but my people have become heartless like ostriches in the desert.
Okay. There are, now some people probably have different translations of that word ostriches. That's one of those that the reason ostriches is used, like I said, we believe that they're in Egypt. So they're in Africa somewhere, and so that's why ostriches is used. Some may have owls there, some may have some other words there, but the translators did their best because they didn't know what the word was, so they did their best. But there's a lot of imagery here. The first verse and the first part of the second verse, we're getting this imagery of Israel as being, the gem, the jewel of God, if you will, this precious gold. And then as we get to the second part of verse 2, we hear that phrase of pots of clay. Where have we heard that before? This molding. Well, the thing is, they are now pots of clay. They've already been molded. And what has happened is they have become, the comparison here is they have become solid, meaning that there's no more molding to be done. They have chosen the shape that they're taking, and they're stuck in that now. If you think about that, the clay cannot be wet again. It's already been fired. Okay, so they're stuck with where they're at, and then we get this heart-wrenching description that even the most horrible of predators take time to nurse their young, but my people can't even do that. It's very strong imagery. Very strong imagery.
Is it significant that ostriches, I think of the people sticking their heads in the sand?
Well, like I said, possibly. I mean, I don't want to discount that, but yeah, there could be that. But I believe that came later on when we started doing studies of taxonomy and things like that. So I doubt that that's what they were thinking when this was written, but I won't discount it. So verses 4 through 6, it gets worse. I'm sorry, guys. So anybody want to read 4 through 6?
The parched tongues of their little ones stick to the roofs of their mouth and thirst. The children cry for bread, but no one has any to give them. The people who once ate the richest foods now beg in the streets for anything they can get. Those who once wore the finest clothes now search the garbage dumps for food. The guilty of my people is greater than that of Sodom, where utter destruction struck in a moment and no hand offered help.
Okay. Like I said, it doesn't sound much better. In fact, it gets a little worse. That description in verse 4, the infant's tongue is stuck to the roof of the mouth. I don't know about y'all. I woke up in the middle of the night with my tongue just as dry as could be. And I'm going, golly, this feels weird. I can't, if I tried to talk, I couldn't, although Karen would kill me if I started speaking in the middle of the night. But children beg for bread, no one gives it to them. And why does no one give it to them?
They don't have it.
Because there's no bread and there's no people to give it to them. Then we see those that were the elite of society are now thrown into the same pool of the demographic as everyone else there, lying on ash heaps. All those, your translation had something about food there, the same kind of thing.
Search the garbage dumps
Yeah.
for food.
And then verse 6, man, what a description. We know the story of Sodom, and the people reading this would have known that too. That was a story that was passed down through oral tradition, through the generations. And when he's saying that it is greater than that of Sodom, what is that? Why do you think that the writer would say that?
I think it was pretty bad.
Well, it was bad, but
Yeah.
Sodom was overthrown in an hour.
Yeah,
This
wiped out.
is going to be a generation, more than a generation of this. So at least Sodom was completely destroyed in an hour. They've got the rest of their lives to live like this. Okay, the next group here, someone want to read 7 through 9.
I'll read that. Their princes were brighter than snow and whiter than milk, their bodies more ruddy than rubies, their appearance like lapis lazuli. But now they are blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It has become as dry as a stick. Those killed by the sword are better off than those who die of famine. Racked with hunger, they waste away for lack of food from the field.
Okay. A lot of imagery, and just as the rest of this has been going, it's getting worse, although this doesn't sound that bad. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about infants in the last section, but the princes were brighter than snow and whiter than milk. Their bodies, so they lived in such luxury that they never even had to get out of the house, is what that's meaning. But now their bodies are more ruddy than rubies. Anybody know a description of anybody in ancient Israel that was described as ruddy? David, as a boy, was described as ruddy.
Yeah.
And what that means is he was tanned beyond belief because he worked the fields. And that's that description. Ruddy ruddy than rubies, more ruddy than rubies. So they're being, the sun is just beating down on them. They're completely sunburned. Their appearance like lapis lazuli. That some of your translations may have amethyst. It's a purple stone. Okay, so their bodies being so sunburned that it's bruising. It's turning purple. Okay, now they're blacker than soot. So we're seeing this progression of their skin just being parched by the desert. The temple is no more. The whole city was decimated. There's nothing for them to cover up with. Their bodies are being burnt by the desert sun. Their skin shriveling on their bones. Well, that's malnutrition. Dry as a stick. Remember, we talked about the tongue. And now imagine that being portrayed over the whole body. And those that are killed off by the sword are better than those who are dying of the famine. I don't want to die either way, but if I had my choice,
I gotta take the sword.
probably, and they're the same way. They're wasting away from lack of food. The only, when I read these kinds of descriptions, the pictures I see, if y'all have ever really seen, I know most of y'all probably have, pictures of the Holocaust.
That's what I
People, just
thought.
skin and bones.
But keep in mind that their bodies are wasting away due to malnutrition. Add in there, if they were in the desert heat, at least they were thrown into a building somewhere. Yeah. But all that did was contribute to more disease because you're in a close space. But at least the sun beating down on them 24/7, at least some of them anyway. And then verse 10 through 12.
I'll read that. With their own hands, women have cooked their own children became their food when my people were destroyed. The Lord has given full vent to his wrath. He has poured out his furious anger. He kindled a fire in Zion and consumed her foundation. The king of the earth did not believe, nor did any of the world's people, but enemies and foes, could enter the gate of Jerusalem.
That first verse just kind of strikes me home. And I'm a dad. I can't imagine how a mother would feel. My only hope is that they did this after their child had died. That would be my only hope in this. The writer here is saying he's given full vent to his wrath. He's poured out his anger. He kindled his fire. He consumed the foundations. And then the kings of the earth did not believe. They're hearkening back to these walls of Jerusalem that Jerusalem was in this, going back to when Solomon was there, was in this wonderful setup in that they were in order to get anywhere in the other kingdoms, you pretty much had to go through Jerusalem. To get to Egypt, to get to any of the Africas, to get around the southern side of the Dead Sea, to get around the northern side of the Sea of Galilee. All that really you had to go through Jerusalem to do that. And so it was never thought that somebody would be able to destroy that with all that Solomon built it up to be. And it just slowly went downhill. 13 through 15.
I'll do it. But it happened because of the sins of the prophets and the iniquities of her priests, who shed within her the blood of the righteousness. Now they broke through the streets as if they were blind. They are defiled with blood, but no one dares to touch their garment. Go away, you are unclean, people cried to them. Away, away, don't touch us. When they flee and wander about, people among the nations say, they can stay here no longer.
Okay. So, you've got a people that is left that the only thing they know is what was the religious expectation of them, the feasts, the sacrifices, the festivals, all this that's going on, those requirements, those religious requirements of them. And so whenever you touched blood or had blood, you were considered unclean. And in order to be purified, you had to go away for 7 days. You had to be outside the city for 7 days. And then you would come, before entering the city, you'd have to wash. Then present yourself to the priest, who would then declare you clean in order to re-enter society. But they're going to, because they can't purify themselves, because there's no priest to present themselves to, they're in a constant state of uncleanliness. Well, when they try to go anywhere else, this is what makes it so remarkable about Egypt that they would end up. When they go anywhere else, all these other nations kind of have the same protocol, if you will. Remember, Israel wanted to be like everybody else. Okay, so these other nations, blood is also unclean to them, except in the matter of sacrifice. So that's what this is saying is that they can't go anywhere else because they're treating them just like they would in their own nation if it still existed. So again, that's what makes it remarkable about Egypt.
Are we talking about a group of people and there are other people that are not getting this treatment?
What do you mean? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Is there everybody in the country is doing this, or this is just a group of people that are believers getting
These are people. This is what's left of Judah. We're probably talking in the hundreds at the most.
Okay.
If that, it may be even less than 100 people, but they're all in this state of uncleanliness. So that does give them one positive in that they can stay around each other. They just can't go around anybody else that's clean. So if you can imagine, if you didn't have any blood on you, you would want to maintain that. But it was almost impossible to do so. And so eventually you'd come to a point where you're the only one with no blood on you. Everyone else is unclean. There was no way of getting around it. You relied on whoever else was there for whatever little you get. So you would intentionally make yourself unclean in order to
Be with the group.
be with the group.
But you couldn't go anywhere else because nobody was.
Correct, because no one would have anything to do. Okay, 16 through 18.
Okay, I'll take it. The Lord himself has scattered them, and he no longer helps them. People show no respect for the priest and no longer honor the leaders. We look in vain for our allies to come and save us, but we were looking to nations that could not help us. We couldn't go into the streets without danger to our lives. Our end was near, our days were numbered, we were doomed.
Okay. That's pretty self-explanatory. Not a whole lot to go into there. We've got these. It says the priests are shown no honor, the elders no favor. Well, those would be included in the people that were left, those that didn't have anything else. So if they're in Egypt now, well, or even anywhere else, well, they have no. There's no status afforded them anymore. There's no respect. There's no authority. They have no authority anywhere. They are just like any of the common people. Looking in vain for help from their towers, we watched for a nation that could not save us. Well, what would the towers be? That would pretty much be any hilltop they could get to, because there's nothing left in Jerusalem. They stalked us at every step. So those that even looking for help, there would be people that would take advantage of them being so destitute that they would take whatever else they had left, or they'd beat them up, rape, any number of things. And of course, that second to last sentence, our end was near, our days were numbered, for our end had come. If only they knew. If only they knew. 19 through 20. I can get that one here. Our pursuers were swifter than eagles in the sky. They chased us over the mountains and lay in wait for us in the desert. The Lord's anointed, our very life breath, was caught in their traps. We thought that under his shadow we would live among the nations. They're very clear about who they identify as. The Lord's anointed. And they describe that as being our very life breath. Of course, that goes back to creation, humanity being breathed, the breath of God being breathed into humanity for life. So not only do they not have food, which is needed to sustain life, they don't have water, which is needed to sustain life, but now they don't have breath, which is not only to sustain life, but also to sustain their identity as the Lord's anointed. We're almost done. But you're just in time. You could read the last two verses.
19 and 20?
No, it'd be 21 and 22.
Rejoice and be glad, daughter Edom, you who live in the land of Uz. But to you also the cup will be passed. You will be drunk and stripped naked. Your punishment will end, daughter Zion. He will not prolong your exile, but he will punish your sin, daughter Edom, and expose your wickedness.
Okay, now we hear the object of Jeremiah's frustration, the people that are chasing, and we now hear it's Edom. And who is Edom? Anybody know the history of Edom?
Is that where?
We've discussed it before, but it's been a while.
Jacob and Ezra?
Esau.
Oh, Esau. That's what
Edom are the descendants of Esau. So when Jacob and Esau, they went their separate ways, remember that promise of God, that covenant of God with Abraham, it extended down. And so Esau was blessed as well. But Edom, the descendants of Edom, that's why it's called daughter, like daughter Israel. But to you also the cup will be passed. You will be drunk and stripped naked. What's happened is Edom is the object of Jeremiah's frustration. Edom is the one, those coming from Edom are the ones who are taking advantage of their own brothers, their own siblings, Jacob, which is Judah. And that because of that, they're going to suffer the same fate, that Babylon is coming for them too. Of course, we know through history that does happen. Babylon does eventually extend a little bit further east. They take all those nations that are on the east side of the Dead Sea and Sea of Galilee. They push to the coast, take over what used to be the Philistine land. They basically take over all of that. So, and so that's where we leave chapter 4. So what I've told you about Lamentations, that it's like a bell curve, how do you think to expect how chapter 5 will be?
Going lower.
Going even lower.
Is it possible? Yeah, that's
well,
higher already.
You know, last week we talked about Job a little bit, and we discussed the comparison with Job, and in their similarities, you know, even though they're similar, they're so different too. Because with Job, we get the background of the story being a test. It's a test. This is not a test. This is discipline. What's happening to Israel? I do not like the word punishment, because punishment is the difference between the two. Punishment is doling out something fierce in order to appease you. Discipline, on the other hand, is doling out something fierce to help them. Okay, so that's where I draw the line. So this is discipline. God is wanting to bring them back into relationship, wanting to bring the people of Israel back into a relationship. We know it's going to take time. I mean, look at our own issues with reconciliation, the racism thing that's going on in our own country. It's been going on for hundreds of years. Things take time. Is it going to be resolved soon? Probably not, unfortunately. So, so that's what separates Job from Israel at this point. But next week, we get to the last part of Lamentations, which is the last time we really hear of Jeremiah. All we have after that are little things in the rabbinic literature that kind of tradition states what happened after that. He would die in the land of Egypt, but we have no scripture that says that. Okay?
So is Lamentations supposed to be written by Jeremiah? Is that what you're saying?
It is attributed.
My Bible says it's unknown.
Correct. It is unknown. It's attributed to Jeremiah because it's taking place during that time, just after the exile, after the destruction of Jerusalem. If it is attributed to Jeremiah, then it was probably written by his secretary Baruch, right, who traveled with Jeremiah everywhere they went. Okay, well, we will call that quits for today. I'm sorry I took so much of your time today.
Thank you very much.
Next week will be, next week should be a fairly normal Sunday school lesson, 40 to 45 minutes is what we typically shoot for. But this was, we didn't have a whole lot of verses today, and a lot of it was very similar to what we heard in the first 2 chapters. So, but next week we'll discuss where we go after Lamentations. So that gets fun, because I know people are getting tired of some of these prophets because it's the same story over and over and over again. But there's a reason for that. I've learned that when you hear things in Scripture, it's important. When you hear it twice, it's really important. So what do you think if you hear it 3 or 4 times?
Really?
Pay
Really?
attention.
You better be living it. Yes. So, okay. Well, thank y'all for being here, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week.
Or,
Yep.